What's up, Raw Spartan Tribe? This is Raw Spartan 125, back for yet another creepy and probably funny reaction. This is Absolute Mad Lads Vlad The Impaler by Count Dankula. I thought I'd use his version of the story because, usually quite good. Usually it puts a good bit of humor in there, and it'll be nice. It'll be nice. So, as it is spooky season, I thought we need to do Dracula. We have to do Dracula. Come on. Come on. So, yeah. There is another one or two Mad Lads ones that were requested, but like I said, this is Halloween season, so why not? Yeah? Okay, let's jump in.
Here we are, October, the spookiest of all the months. Children sleep a little less soundly as the dead roam among the living, strange beasts stalk in dark forests, and with the festival of Samhain approaching, the borders between the real and the supernatural blur. It's a lot of airy-fairy shite if you ask me, but some people are into that stuff. In this spookiest of months, it is only right that we take time to talk about the spookiest of boys. Everyone knows of the classic Halloween monsters like the Wolfman, Frankenstein's monster, mummies, and so on. But the king of the jungle, as it were, for Halloween monsters is Dracula.
Yeah.
Luckily, Dracula himself is just a fable, but the person that he is based on is anything but. And this real-life inspiration is one of the cruelest and most vicious people in all of human history. Vlad III Tepes Dracula, better known as Vlad the Impaler.
Here we go!
Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. But before we get into the Mad Lad, this video is brought to you by Raycon. Raycon is changing the audio game with their wireless earbuds that start at half the price of other premium audio brands without sacrificing sound quality. The new everyday Vlad was born in the... I realised that he got the A suffix at the end of in the Order of the Dragon. It was born as Vlad. So if you want to get some top tier earbuds while supporting my channel, then click the link down in the description below or go to buyraycon.com/Dankula to get 15% off your order. Born sometime between 1428 and 1431, Vlad was born as Vlad III to his father, Vlad II Dracul. The name Dracul, rather than being a family name, was awarded to Vlad II because of his membership in the Order of the Dragon. Dracul meaning dragon in medieval Romanian. The Order of the Dragon was founded by Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund in order to stop the Ottoman Empire's advance into Europe. And since his son was the son of the dragon, he got the A suffix at the end of his name, which made him Vlad III Dracula. I realise that all this Vlad II and Vlad III stuff is getting a bit confusing, so from here on out I will refer to Vlad the Impaler as just Vlad, and I will refer to his father as Daddy Vladdy. Vlad was born in the Transylvanian Saxon town of Sighisora, and the identity of his mother is a matter of some debate, because although he was married, Daddy Vladdy was a bit of a shagger. So it could have been any one of his mistresses who was the real mother. Daddy Vladi took over the Kingdom of Wallachia after his half-brother Alexander died in 1436. In 1442, Daddy Vladi had a meeting with John Hunyadi, the voivode of Transylvania. A voivode is the highest-ranking regional official within the Kingdom of Hungary, roughly translating to warlord. In this meeting, Daddy Vladi did not support an Ottoman invasion of Transylvania. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Murad II, ordered him to come to Gallipoli and demonstrate his loyalty to the empire. The young Vlad and his brother Radu went with Daddy Vladi on this trip, leaving Daddy Vladi's oldest son, Mircea II, in charge of Wallachia while he was gone. And all three of the merry travellers were imprisoned in the fortress of Egrigos in modern-day Turkey. After a year, Daddy Vladi was released, but the young Vlad and Radu were kept behind and remained in captivity for the next 4 or 5 years. Here they were educated and given lessons in Turkish and the teachings of the Quran, as well as military training. They also observed the cruelty that the Ottomans used to achieve their goals, which surely had an effect on the young boys, as becomes apparent in Vlad's later life. While Radu was quite happy to accept a new way of life and would eventually convert to Islam, Vlad remained vehement in his love for Wallachia and threw up a fuss at any given opportunity, despite constant punishment. In 1447, Hungarian-backed rebels commanded by John Hunyadi attacked Wallachia due to their relationship with the Ottoman Empire, and they forced Daddy Vladi and Mircea to flee. But they were eventually captured and killed. No more Daddy Vladi. When Daddy Vladi died, it made young Vlad a potential claimant to the throne of Wallachia, but he had a fierce rival in Vladislav II, Vlad's second cousin, who was put on the throne by Hunyadi. And things might get a little bit confusing from here on out, because it turns out that in Transylvania back then, pretty much everyone was called some variation of Vlad. In September of 1448, Vladislav II left Wallachia with John Hunyadi to fight the Ottomans. Vlad the Impaler saw an empty throne and thought, I'll have that, and took over Wallachia in October of the same year, backed by an Ottoman army. This takeover came at a cost to Wallachia though, as Vlad had to give up the fortress of Gheorghiu on the Danube River to the Ottomans. The Ottomans seem to have been on a roll that month, as they also defeated Hunyadi and Vladislav's army at the Battle of Kosovo, but this meant that the army of Wallachia was coming home with a very upset Vladislav. So Vlad the Impaler was forced to flee into Moldavia in December of 1448, meaning that he only ruled for 2 months. In Moldavia, Vlad lived with his uncle Bogdan II until 1451, when Vlad was once again forced to flee after Bogdan was assassinated. Vlad went with Bogdan's son, Stephen, to Transylvania to stay with Hunyadi, who had since turned against Vladislav because of his appeasement of the Ottomans and his raids on Transylvanian villages. Can we take a minute to appreciate the first absolutely boring name in this story? Bogdan, Hunyadi, Vlad, Vladislav, Stephen. After a mysterious visit back to Moldavia, where the guy who killed the last guy in charge had been killed by the new guy in charge, a man called Alexandru, Vlad returned to Wallachia in 1456 with an army and a task from Hunyadi to defend the Transylvanian border from the Ottomans, who had just taken Constantinople just 3 years prior. Vlad's army met Vladislav's army, and after a bloody battle, Vlad killed Vladislav, his own cousin, in single combat. And so Vlad became voivode of Wallachia once more. He promised the Transylvanian burghers, which is the name for their upper class and also a very stupid name, that he would protect them from an Ottoman invasion, but also expected their help if the Ottomans were to invade Wallachia. When Vlad took power, he did as all good authoritarian rulers do and started to execute people that he didn't like. He began a purge of all the Wallachian aristocracy, murdering anyone who had any hand in the murder of his father and brother, giving any land, money or property those aristocrats had to his own retainers. And now we get into how Vlad earned the infamous title The Impaler. Although I'm pretty sure most of you have already guessed by now because it's pretty self-evident. He invited all of the nobles that he personally found guilty to an Easter feast with their families, of course. And as soon as they all arrived, they were arrested, and Vlad began his bloody revenge. The adult prisoners were all impaled there and then in front of their children, and the children were immediately put to work rebuilding the castle which had been damaged in the battle that Vlad fought to retake Wallachia.
So, the children were put to work. Children were put to work? Wouldn't it be better to get the adults to do it? I don't know. Oh well. Suppose it worked, right? The children were put to work. Right. That's bad though. Oh. How much do you want to bet he impaled the children too? Probably. When they were done, yeah?
The children were immediately put to work rebuilding the castle which had been damaged in the battle that Vlad fought to retake Wallachia. And as soon as the work was complete, they were all impaled as well.
Yep,
Vlad was a harsh ruler.
Yeah.
A very harsh ruler. Records show that only 2 members of his council were able to survive their jobs all the way through his reign. He punished any slight against his idea of what was morally right, swiftly and severely. Reports say that any women who lost their virginity before marriage were impaled with the stakes going through.
Oh.
Well, you know where. Ironic. Their breasts would also then be chopped off, and the man who had taken the woman's virginity was forced to eat them. You know, thought patrolling, but with war crimes. Vlad also hated beggars and the homeless, and he once invited all of them to a great feast, and when the beggars had full bellies and big smiles, Vlad bolted the doors and burned down the building. See if you are ever invited to dinner in medieval Europe, just don't go. Just don't go. How many mad lads have we had so far that have done this exact thing?
Yeah.
If you're ever invited to dinner in medieval Europe, just don't go, because there is like a 90% chance it's an assassination plot. Vlad has been quoted as saying, when a man or a prince is strong and powerful enough, he can make peace as he wants to. But when he is weak, a stronger one will come and do what he wants to him. You heard him right. Be a Chad or some other Chad is going to come in and turn you into their pet femboy. After the death of John Hunyadi, his son Ladislaus Hunyadi became Captain General of Hungary. He didn't like Vlad because, let's be honest, who does? He wrote to the burghers in Transylvania that they should support Vladislav II's brother to take the throne of Wallachia. This brother has a name that echoes throughout history, a name that shakes the ground upon it merely being whispered, a name that makes its enemies shit themselves where they stand. Ladislaus told the burghers to support Dan. Dan the Third. A different Ladislaus, Ladislaus the Fifth, King of Hungary. Can Slavs please come up with more than 3 names? Had Ladislaus Hunyadi executed in 1457. This made Hunyadi's family, the Silagis, quite upset, as it would.
Yeah.
And they started a rebellion against the king. Seeing an opportunity, Vlad the Impaler helped Prince Stephen take Moldavia in June of 1457. While he was at it, Vlad did a spot of honest raiding in Transylvania, taking the Saxons, who were still loyal to the royal family during the rebellion, back to Wallachia, where he had them, you guessed it, impaled.
Big surprise.
Men, women, and children alike. The Saxons and the Silagis eventually...
Well, look at the bright side. Not only did he impale women, not only did he impale men, he impaled women and children as well. Therefore, he was not sexist or ageist. He had that going for him, right? I mean, he treated everybody equally and diversely, and yeah. At least he wasn't sexist or ageist. Yeah. Okay.
At it, Vlad did a spot of honest raiding in Transylvania, taking the Saxons, who were still loyal to the royal family during the rebellion, back to Wallachia, where he had them, you guessed it, impaled. Men, women, and children alike. The Saxons and the Silagis eventually entered peace talks, and Vlad sent representatives in order to secure Wallachia's interests. Not only did the treaty exile the dreaded Dan, but promised free trade between Wallachian merchants and the merchants of Sibiu, a city in Transylvania. Love a good free market. A new king had to be put into place following the rebellion, and who better than the younger brother of Ladislaus Hunyadi, Matthias Corvinus.
Yeah, I just need to ask, is everybody up to date now? Is everybody like following this? Because I'm not. You kind of lost me. But you know what? I'm gonna stick with it. Just all the names and all this. Yeah, okay. You know what? I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best to stick with it and to yeah.
Love a good free market. A new king had to be put into place following the rebellion, and who better than the younger brother of Ladislaus Hunyadi, Matthias Corvinus. Corvinus ordered the burghers to keep peace with Vlad. Although Vlad had built good relations with the Saxons in Transylvania, this quickly deteriorated back to its standoffish state. This came to a head when a Wallachian merchant had the steel that he was selling confiscated by the Transylvanian Saxons. In response, Vlad did what all good maniacs do and sought out a bloody and fiery vengeance. According to a letter that was sent by Basarab Alta, who was the brother of that most dreaded enemy, Dan, Vlad captured 41 merchants. He took all of their wealth and then he impaled them.
Yeah.
He impaled them. Not satisfied by this, he then rounded up 300 random boys from Transylvania that were in Wallachia. He burned some of them, and the rest, you'll never guess. And not in a million years would you be able to guess. He impaled them. He impaled all of them. Of course he impaled them. He impales fucking everyone. Dan decided that enough
So let me get this straight. These poor buggers, right? These poor boys. Some of them were burned, horrible, and the rest, of course, yeah, were impaled. Of course, you know, Vlad the Impaler. Yeah, like his favorite pastime. Yeah, was impaling people. Wow. So which one would you prefer? Burned, alive, or impaled? Also alive. There's not really much of a choice there when you think about it. Uh, but when you realize where the spike went into and where it exited, maybe a good burning. Yeah. That's a tough one. It is. Yeah. For me, that's tough. I don't know.
You'll never guess. And not in a million years would you be able to guess. He impaled them. He impaled all of them. Of course he impaled them. He impales fucking everyone. Dan decided that enough was enough and broke into Wallachia in 1460. But he was captured by Vlad, and at last the scourge that was Dan was defeated. Children can now sleep safely in their beds without the ever-present threat of Dan looming over them. Vlad, high off of his defeat of Dan, invaded southern Transylvania, capturing everyone that he saw along the way, and boy, I wonder what he did to the people that he captured. It's a mystery. It was a short campaign, but he had punished the supporters of Dan, leaving fields, literal fields, as far as the eye could see of people impaled on stakes. Meanwhile, Vlad had been neglecting paying his tributes to the Sultan, Mehmed II. Vlad had been in talks with Matthias Corvinus about an alliance to defend Hungary from the Ottomans, and when the Sultan heard of this, he was furious, believing Wallachia to be rightfully his. Mehmed sent envoys to Wallachia to collect 10,000 ducats from Vlad, as well as 1,000 men to join the Ottomans' army as janissaries, who were elite slave soldiers. When the envoys arrived, Vlad was angry that they would not lift their turbans as a sign of respect. And since the envoys were so set on keeping their turbans on their heads, Vlad thought that he would help them with this by literally nailing their turbans to their skulls.
Nice.
He nailed their turbans to their fucking heads. Vlad was a large proponent of the fuck about and find out style of diplomacy. In 1461, the Sultan ordered Vlad to come to Constantinople to negotiate.
Yeah.
Vlad sent a letter in response saying that he couldn't pay the Sultan due to the lack of resources that he had after his fights against the Saxons, and he couldn't leave Wallachia out of fear of being overthrown in his absence.
Yes.
He promised the Sultan that he would pay as soon as he could, and that he would come to Constantinople if the Sultan sent someone to rule in his place while he was gone. The Sultan sent the chieftain of Nicopolis, Hamza Pasha, to have a diplomatic meeting with Vlad in Giurgiu, a city on the Danube River. But it was no diplomatic mission at all. It was in fact a planned ambush. Hamza had orders to capture Vlad with 1,000 cavalrymen and take him back to Constantinople. Vlad caught wind of the scheme and decided to turn the ambush against his ambusher. When Hamza's force was travelling through a narrow pass, Vlad's army surrounded them and fired hand cannons down at them until the entire force was killed. Historians credit this as one of the first uses of gunpowder in battle, and it was used to great effect. Vlad had done his military general part, but now he had a different part to play. This is the beginning of Metal Gear Solid Balkans Edition. Vlad disguised himself as a Turk and advanced his cavalry into Georgiou, where he then used his perfect Turkish that he learned as a child while imprisoned by the Ottomans to tell the guards to open the gate. And once they did, he marched his entire army in and destroyed the fortress. Vlad then sent his armies on campaigns all over southern Wallachia and Bulgaria, killing any enemy soldier or anyone who sympathised with the Ottomans. In 2 weeks, Vlad had killed over 23,000 Turks. Vlad sent a letter to Matthias Corvinus that basically said, "We fucked some shit up. No more peace with the Sultan. Here's a list of all the places that I killed people." Upon hearing about the constant slaughter of his men, the Sultan sent his Grand Vizier, Mahmud, with an army of 18,000 to destroy the port town of Brela in Wallachia. Vlad always had his ear to the ground though, and was able to defeat this army and save the town. Of the 18,000 Turks sent, only 8,000 survived. Vlad's military victories were celebrated throughout Christendom, with the Saxons he terrorised, the Italian states, and even the Pope, all claiming these as great victories in the name of the Lord. Many Turks who were on the European side of the empire fled for Anatolia to escape Vlad's reign of terror. One Turk that didn't flee was Sultan Mehmed. He decided enough was enough and it was time for him to take the fight to Vlad. Mehmed sent a message to all corners of his realm to try to assemble an army in which numbers and armaments must have been equal to that which he employed in the siege of Constantinople. The exact size of the army is a matter of some debate, but the Sultan himself wrote a letter saying that he had 150,000 men, while some historians believe the number may have been as large as 300,000, and one contemporary source estimates it as high as 400,000, with 40,000 of them being bridge builders that were armed with axes. And serving as a general under the Sultan was Vlad's own half-brother that he had been imprisoned with in his youth. Radu had now earned the title Radu the Handsome, or Chadu, if you will. He commanded 4,000 horsemen. The Sultan left nothing to chance, bringing every tool that he had available. Cavalry, firearms, slave fighters who would win their freedom if they survived, a detachment of personal bodyguards for himself, engineers, cannons, Islamic priests to make sure Allah was on their side, astrologers to make sure the stars favoured the Ottomans, and obviously some women so that the soldiers could get a nice little morale boost for battle. Vlad was
very thoughtful. Bring the women, I have to admit. You don't hear a lot of that going on when it comes to battles. You don't hear a lot of the leaders of the monarchs or whatever being so generous as to think of the soldiers' need for companionship. Yes. Companionship, that's a good word. Yeah.
Priests to make sure Allah was on their side, astrologers to make sure the stars favoured the Ottomans, and obviously some women so that the soldiers could get a nice little morale boost before battle. Vlad was not going to win this particular dick measuring contest.
Yeah.
Despite being promised by Matthias Corvinus that he would mobilise every man, woman and child over the age of 12 as well as gypsy slaves, he received no support. The most popular accepted number for his army is 30,000. But the same source that claimed the Sultan had 400,000 claimed that the Wallachians had 200,000. Maths was not exactly the man's strong suit. In contrast to the more highly trained Ottomans, Vlad's army was mostly peasants who had been drafted. You know, one day you're herding sheep, the next you're killing Turks. The Balkans haven't really changed much, have they? The Turks began their advance into Vlad's neck of the woods, and although they were held off by hit-and-run tactics and archery volleys, he was eventually forced to retreat to Targoviste, the capital of Wallachia. While fleeing, Vlad instituted a scorched earth policy, leaving nothing of value for the Turks to claim. He poisoned wells, he created marshes by diverting rivers, he left pit traps, and he evacuated every person and animal. The Sultan's army marched for 7 days through this absolute wasteland that Vlad had created, suffering from fatigue and finding less supplies than they would have hoped. Vlad kept up his hit-and-run attacks and began sending lepers, plague victims, and other people afflicted with deadly diseases into the Turkish camps in order to spread the disease and lower morale. The Ottoman navy made attacks on ports in Bulgaria, but Vlad had already destroyed them, so not much could come from that. On June the 17th, 1462, the Sultan's army were finally camped near Targoviste. So close to his home, the big boss Vlad had to don his headband once again and continue the chronicles of Metal Gear Solid Turk Eater. That very night, Vlad disguised himself as a Turk and, once again using his fluent Turkish, freely entered the camp, wandering around and learning everything that he could. He soon learned that the Ottoman soldiers were forbidden from leaving their tents at night to mitigate panic if there was an attack. Nope, I don't really understand that one either.
No.
After learning this piece of information, Vlad planned to attack at night, where the response to an assault on the camp would be delayed by soldiers staying inside their tents. Before he left the camp, however, Vlad made sure to locate something very important. The Sultan's tent. And Vlad found its exact location, so he knew exactly where to focus his attack, since he believed that if he could cut off the head of the Ottoman beast, the rest of the Ottoman soldiers would scatter. The skirmish was planned to last 3 hours after sunset until 4 the next morning, and during that time the Wallachians launched several waves of attack, devastating the Turkish forces. Vlad headed straight for the Sultan's tent, but unfortunately, he had made a little bit of a mistake, and he accidentally chose the tent of 2 Grand Viziers. Unable to locate the Sultan, Vlad called off the attack at dawn and retreated back to Targoviste. The Sultan was absolutely rocked by this attack, and he was contemplating giving up entirely and going back across the Danube River, where he was cool and everyone liked him. His generals gave him the pep talk that he needed, and the Sultan led his army into the capital of Targoviste. But rather than finding a Wallachian resistance, they instead found an abandoned town. Abandoned apart from the literal forest of impaled Turks. Here is a quote from the Greek chronicler Chalcondyles. The Sultan's army entered into the area of the impalements, which was 10,200 feet long and 4,200 feet wide. There were large stakes there on which, as it was said, about 20,000 men, women and children had been spitted. Quite a sight for the Turks and the Sultan himself. The Sultan was seized with amazement and said that it was not possible to deprive his country of a man who had done such great deeds, who had such a diabolical understanding of how to govern his realm and its people. And he said that a man who had done such things was worth much. The rest of the Turks were dumbfounded when they saw the multitude of men on the stakes. There were infants too, affixed to their mothers on the stakes, and birds had made their nests in their entrails.
Lovely.
History is fucked, man. The Sultan decided to march towards Brela, while Vlad made his way to Chilia in modern-day Ukraine to assist his cousin Stephen in defeating a Hungarian garrison in a fortress there. Vlad left behind a rearguard of 6,000 men to hinder the Ottomans on their journey, but the Wallachians were soundly defeated. The main Ottoman force left Wallachia, but Radu the Handsome stayed behind, sending messages over the country reminding them that the Ottomans could invade them at any time, and they should support him as he was a Wallachian who was allied with the Ottomans. This convinced a good number of Wallachians who then deserted Vlad to join Radu. Before long, Radu was recognised as the ruler of Wallachia. Vlad fled to the Carpathian Mountains in Transylvania and waited for Matthias Corvinus, who he was sure would restore him to the throne in Targoviste. Matthias came to Vlad and negotiated with him for weeks, but he had turned against Vlad, and some historians speculate that this was because he was making a bid to be Holy Roman Emperor and he wanted an end of hostilities with the Turks to make that dream come true. But there is no real evidence to prove this, and it's just speculation. Matthias had Vlad captured and imprisoned, and to prove the legitimacy of this imprisonment, he produced 3 letters which supposedly proved Vlad was in cahoots with the Sultan to restore him to the throne if he attacked Hungary. And most people now agree that these documents were forged by Matthias. Vlad was imprisoned in Belgrade, but was very soon taken to Visegrad, where he remained for 14 years in custody. Unfortunately, there is no record of Vlad during these years, but let's just say I wouldn't want to share a prison cell with a guy called The Impaler. In 1475, Vlad was released from prison after Stephen of Moldavia requested his release to retake the throne of Wallachia from Basarab Lauta, who had taken the throne from Radu the Chad. During his time in prison, Vlad had converted to Catholicism, and shortly after his release, he married Justina Silagi, the cousin of Matthias Corvinus. They settled in a house in Pest, and although Corvinus recognised Vlad as the rightful prince of Wallachia, he was not yet on the throne, and he received no military help from him. Although Vlad was ordered not to return to Wallachia, he gathered up a ragtag army and, after a fight to help Stephen in Moldavia, moved on his former stronghold of Targoviste. With his alliance with Stephen confirmed, he easily drove out Prince Basarab, who went running with his tail between his legs back to the Ottomans.
Yeah,
Vlad was once again crowned Voivode of Wallachia in 1476. However, this would be a very short reign. In either December of 1476 or January of 1477, Basarab returned with an Ottoman army and retook Wallachia, and Vlad the Impaler was killed during this battle. According to contemporary sources, Vlad was cut into pieces after his death, and his head was preserved in honey and sent back to Constantinople so that the Sultan and the Ottomans as a whole could truly see that the Impaler's reign of terror was finally at an end. Vlad the Impaler left a legacy that most rulers could only dream of leaving, or conversely, be terrified of leaving. German Saxon stories at the time tell a tale of a demented psychopath, a sadist, a gruesome murderer, and a masochist, while in modern-day Romania, he is heralded as a national hero, a staunch defender of the faith and of his beloved homeland. Of course, he is well known for being the namesake of the dreaded Count Dracula. But compare the two. One sucked the blood from a few peasants and failed to take over England, and the other terrified the biggest power in Eastern Europe and butchered all of those who stood in his path, having impaled over an estimated 20,000 people.
Ooh.
Compared to Vlad the Impaler, Count Dracula's kind of a pussy.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube! Everybody should subscribe!
Okay, that is the end of the video. And as expected, that was enjoyable. Mostly. Yeah, I liked it. It was a lot of fun. Okay. Until next time, I am out of here.